Hello and welcome back to the Catholic Cinema Crusade podcast. I'm Nick Olzik and I'm here with Violet Olzik, my wife and producer. We are here for our 21st episode. It's our rebrand episode. We're going to try something a little bit new. And today we're talking about the Bluey trilogy finale of roughly about a month ago of Ghost Basket, The Sign, and Surprise. So stick around and we got a lot to say. All right. First, let's start with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Dear Lord, as we finish out the Easter season and begin the long journey of ordinary time, thank you for the ordinary TV shows and movies that give us such joy. Help us to have a good filter for what's good and what's not, and to use our gifts for your glory. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. All right, today is May 25th, 2024. This is our 21st episode, and we're going to do something a little bit different. Rather than just have me speaking, ad infinitum and listening to the shrillness of my voice, I thought it would be a lot better and have more depth if we had kind of a back and forth. So I invited my wife, Violet, to kind of be my co-host on this podcast. I'll be kind of taking the lead, but she'll be jumping in with kind of her own points, asking me questions. I'll ask questions of her. We've had her on the show before, like when we did our most anticipated films of 2024. That was a good episode. And today we're going to be talking about the finale of Bluey, the classic Aussie show that's been a phenomenon. It had its big kind of soft series finale of a trilogy of 3 episodes about a month and a half ago, and so we're going to talk a little about it. So first, let's just introduce ourselves again. So you know me, I'm Nick Olzik. I live and work and teach in Eugene, Oregon. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Film Production from Chapman University and a Master's in Pastoral Theology from Loyola Marymount University. I've been reviewing films for over a decade now for Catholic World Report. And let's hear a little bit about my not-so-new co-host, Violet. Welcome.
Hello.
So just tell us a little about your background and what you're interested in.
Well, I got my Bachelor's of Arts from Cal State Long Beach. I have worked on YouTube videos off and on since then. I've been helping Nick with his reviews for the past however long you've been doing them. And I guess I've just always really liked movies. And just one quirky thing. I was thinking about, because I was trying to find videos for Nathan, like behind the scenes videos, one of our sons, because he's very interested in animation. And I remembered that most of the ones I watched when I was growing up were like in between the TV shows on Disney Channel.
Right.
So like to promote like The Lion King, in between whatever TV shows were on Disney Channel, they would have these like little videos.
Right.
And like I cannot find any of those. I have no idea where to look for them.
Yeah, they'd have nothing like that now with streaming. It's so funny living in the world of streaming and seeing my kids grow up at it because they have no concept of like a time slot. They don't understand why they can't see a certain film. Like, oh, why don't you just look it up, on the streaming or whatever. It's so weird them growing up and having like total control. You really can kind of have a world without commercials, at least in part. It's really interesting. Maybe we'll do an episode on that at some point. But let's talk about Bluey.
Why don't you start by telling us kind of what Bluey is as a show, and then go into the plot of these specific episodes.
So, Bluey starts with its creator, Joe Broom, who was an Australian animator. He did a lot of little work back in the early 2000s. He was one of the head animators on Peppa Pig, which is a British show about a family of pigs. In many ways, it was kind of the precursor to Bluey. He borrowed a lot of themes from Peppa Pig. One of the things he said he loved about Peppa Pig was it was a universal show, but was also thoroughly British. Had a lot of British idioms, British foods, British mannerisms, and since he was from Australia, he wanted to create a similar show. A kids show that highlighted Aussie idioms and Aussie geography and Aussie foods and Aussie culture. So he came up with the idea for Bluey. It had its pilot episode in 2016, its first premiere episode in 2018. And in terms of its brand, it seems like a fairly standard family, kids sitcom. You got a mom, you got a dad, you got two kids, both girls, the head kid, Bluey, the younger sister, Bingo. The dad's name is Bandit, the mom's name is Chili. Both the parents work. And rather than focus on like the ABCs or going through specific emotional lessons like Fred Rogers, it focused on play. So pretty much every episode, and they're only about 7 minutes long each, focused on some aspect of play, some game that they would have with their friends or at school or with their dad, especially Bandit. You would learn lessons through these play, things like sharing and imagination, and occasionally heavier topics like loss. So there's a famous episode where Bluey finds a dead or a dying bird, and they bring it to the vet, and then the vet has to tell Bluey that it's dead, and, things like that. Later on the show, as it progresses, they kind of branch out and get a little bit more direct. So there's an episode on infertility and what happens when parents argue and what it's like to grow old, that sort of thing. And Bluey started very much with an Australian audience, but especially during the pandemic in 2002, 2001, 2022 kind of became universally loved. I don't really remember hearing about it until 2023, like early last year. I remember hearing a little bit about it, seeing the images, but someone's like, you gotta check this out, And once we started watching it, just like we had watched maybe every single episode, and there were well over 100 by that point in the span of like a month. I was just kind of in awe of how good it was. It was just fantastic. It had a really strong family structure with two parents who both worked really hard and clearly loved their kids and were willing to play with kids. Especially the breakout character, I think, is Bandit, the dad, because you have, especially in American comedy, even in children's animation, the dad's kind of even if he's a loving dad, he's kind of brain dead and he's ignorant. And there's a classic article that Stephen Greydonis, the film reviewer at National Catholic Register, had called Junior Knows Best, where he goes through, the history of the deadbeat dad, kind of starting with Homer Simpson and Peter Griffin and things like that. But Bandit, on the one hand, is very present to his kids. He loves playing with his kids. He takes time for his kids. He allows his mistakes to be known, but he's not a wimp. He's a very strong person. He's got that kind of classic Aussie strength to him that you think about like Crocodile Dundee. So he loves sports, and he loves hanging out with his mates, and he loves doing yard work, and, he has a job. He's an archaeologist, so he goes out on these adventures and that sort of thing. And it's that strength, but also gentleness that is really at the heart of masculinity that I think a lot of people hadn't seen in a long time. And so that was a big deal, okay? Anything else about Bluey you want to say?
That might be a bit much, but so let's get into these 3 episodes that we wanted to talk about.
All right.
You said it was Ghost Basket, The Sign, and Surprise. Okay.
All right. So I call this the series finale. We don't know for sure if Bluey is actually over. Basically, what Joe Broom said, they made 154 episodes in roughly about 5 years, and he said after that they were burned out and they wanted to take a break. So they announced probably about 4 or 5 months ago that they were going to have, rather than a 7-minute episode, a 30-minute episode, so 4 times as long. That would be kind of a soft series finale. They weren't going to absolutely say, we're done with Bluey, we're never making Bluey again, but they wanted to take a leave of absence. They wanted to spend more time with their families. They wanted to, he was feeling kind of burned out. So they announced this, and so for all intents and purposes, we're considering this a series finale or at least a series break. So first, and what's really neat is when they announced it, they just said, oh, it's going to be The Sign. It's going to be a 30-minute episode. But then they had a 7-minute kind of prequel, Ghost Basket, in which, and this is spoiler alerts, we're going to talk about what happens in each of the episodes, which we learn they're Bluey and Bingo and Bandit are playing this game where there's this, they're pretending to sell their house and they don't want the house to be sold, so they pretend it's haunted, and the haunted being is this basket that's over their head, so they're their ghost basket. And at the end of the episode, which is only 7 minutes long, you learn that in fact they are really selling their house. At the very end, you see the for sale sign outside of the healer's family house, and so you're left with this cliffhanger, like, what's going on?
This encapsulates what I love about the show. Mm-hmm. Because this is how children deal with whatever's going on in their life, right?
Right.
Like, I remember the episode about the Pudgy that died.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, sometime after that, like, I took the girls with me when we had to put the dog down. And the girls basically did that episode, right? Where they pretended they went to the children's museum, they had the little puppy, and they like pretended the puppy died. Mm-hmm. And like, so that's why the show is so good, is it deals with problems in the way that children deal with problems.
Right. It's really great, and you can tell that the creators of the show are parents themselves, that they've had a lot of these interactions that the characters has. It's one of the most honest shows I've seen just in terms of parenting and kids and that sort of thing. So then comes the sign, the big episode. And in addition to the fact that we know the house is being sold, we also have a wedding happening. So Rad Healer, who is Bluey's uncle, is getting married to Frisky, who at one point in the past was Bluey's babysitter. Okay, and they met on an episode a couple seasons ago called The Babysitter, and it was kind of implied that they started dating afterwards. It was kind of a meet cute episode. They were kind of set up by Chili. It's a cute episode too. Anyhow, they're getting married, and so they're getting the house ready, and Bluey and Bingo are going to be flower girls as well as their cousins Muffin and Socks, and they're all really excited about this. But then things go terribly awry, as they must. Basically, Frisky and Rad have a falling out where he kind of says that he expects Frisky to move with him far away from her home, but she didn't know that. They fight on the phone, and she kind of runs off. So we have a runaway bride situation.
It was definitely his fault. He should have at least mentioned it to her.
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I found that a bit unrealistic that he would just completely not tell his wife until his wedding day. Oh, by the way, I think we should move you to where I live and I work, and you'll find a new job or stay at home or whatever. Like, the idea that in the course of a engagement they would never bring this up, I think is kind of ridiculous. But anyway, so she runs away. And so, of course, Chili enlists the girls, and they have to go find her. And then it's basically a scavenger hunt. Like, where would Frisky go? Oh, she would go here. Oh, she would go here. And along the way, Bluey's kind of dealing with this trauma of moving. She doesn't want to move. Chili also doesn't really want to move, but she thinks it's what's best for the family, which, of course, is connected to Frisky not wanting to move. There's, some false starts and stuff like this. At the same time, we see the family that's buying the healer house. They are excited to get a new house, but they kind of settled on the healer house. They wanted something else, but then they find a better house. They don't know what's going to happen, and eventually it all comes together in a nice bow, okay? Again, spoiler alert, Rad and Frisky reconcile. They come back. They have the wedding. It's a big party. Everybody has fun. And then the family that was going to buy the healer house at the last minute backs out because they find a better house, and Bandit takes this as a sign, hint hint, name title, that they were never really meant to move, and he dramatically picks up the for sale sign, he throws it on the ground, and everybody's happy, and so they end up not moving, okay? So that's the 28-minute big finale, and that was supposed to be the actual finale. And then literally days after this came out, they announced, oh, we have a special bonus 7-minute episode. Kind of a little bonus episode.
A surprise, you
right.
might say.
So the episode's called Surprise. So that was really exciting. It's like, oh, we get a free Bluey episode. So in the episode Surprise, which it starts out as a very kind of, I guess you would call it standard Bluey episode, like Bluey wants to play a game. She wants to play with her dad. Her dad wants to watch sports on the TV, but then Bingo wants to play a game. And of course, because he's a nice dad, he's going to try to find a way to play with both of them while also watching his sports team, and the whole thing goes terribly awry. We'll talk more about this episode later. Of the three, I actually like this one the best. Partially because it speaks very much to what dads have to deal with kids. And so basically, Bluey is learning what it's like to be a parent. She sees everything Bandit does for her and her sister, and she realizes how difficult it is, and she's like, oh, this is what being a parent means. It means sacrificing. It means, doing things that you don't want to do because you love your kids. It's a nice little lesson. And then, of course, the big reveal in the last, literally 90 seconds is that there's a major flash forward well into the future where Bandit and Chili are now much older, look like probably their late 50s, early 60s, somewhere in there.
Around there.
And Bluey is now a young adult, probably in her late 20s, early 30s, and she comes by to say hi. They joke about almost selling the house. And then at the very last scene, we get what is not explicitly said, but is implied, is Bluey's child, who is interacting with Bandit in the same way Bluey used to do. And that's really great, because on the one hand, you could stop there and say that's the end of the series, you can make up your own imagination, or we could restart in a couple of years with Bluey's kid, or even just kind of tantalize that and go back to Bluey. We don't know, okay? But it's a nice way to end it, okay? So that's basically what happened. So now let's talk about kind of what we saw, what we liked, what we didn't like. Now, obviously, because this is Catholic Cinema Crusade, I want to start just talking about the Christian imagery in Bluey, and then specifically these three episodes. Now, right away by the title, The Sign, you get something that I think has been present throughout the whole series. This is not an explicitly Christian show. Like Mr. Rogers, I would venture to say it very much has a Judeo-Christian context, but it's not like you ever see the Healer family at church. You see a priest once, I vaguely remember, in one episode, or a dog wearing a collar, like a Roman collar.
Right.
No one really mentions God or mentions Jesus explicitly, but the context and the culture is very Christian, especially this idea of providence. So the fact the episode's called The Sign, throughout the whole episode, characters are weaving in and out of each other. One character does one thing, which then makes, unbeknownst to them, something happen to some other character. So, for example, when they find Frisky, she's at this gazebo at this park. They put a coin in to try to find, it's one of those viewfinders. The coin doesn't work. They leave the park. Then the family that was going to buy their house finds the viewfinder, has the coin already put in there, so they view it and they find the house that they do end up buying. So through a series of events by Bluey and Chili being there, that led to them eventually saving their house. So you see all these different things, one leading to another. So the idea of providence.
There's another big theme too, that kind of goes along with that is like, oh, things always work out the way they're supposed to. Right.
So there's an invisible hand behind all things. And I think the episode that expressed this best, which is the only Bluey episode I actually show in my theology classes at high school, is the episode Flatback, where it's basically without getting to specific the episode, it's a re-dramatization of, if you want, the entire history of the world, but from this idea that God is guiding it, that God has a plan and is moving things, and that one thing leads to another, and that God provides what humanity needs to continue and to know him. So it's about revelation, that sort of thing, without ever even mentioning God, which is pretty impressive, okay? So there is very much this theistic context to the show. Things always work out. And the idea of love, that the way the families and dynamics of relationships work because of love, because people give of themselves to Bandit is always giving himself up to his girls. Chili is giving up things that she wants. The characters put aside their own needs for the needs of others. Bluey is constantly learning how to do this. Bingo's a little bit better at this, which is one of the funny things about the show, is that Bingo, even though she's 2 years younger than Bluey, is the far more mature one. And just the fun of being together and the fun of being silly. It's a very family-centric show that has this kind of strong Christian context, which again comes from the fact that, this is a British Commonwealth country, and thus it has very much this kind of British Anglican feeling kind of baked into the cake. And while that doesn't mean everybody obviously follows Christianity perfectly, far from it, it is part of the cultural ambiance of Australian culture. The fact that, we can make it and we're going to be tough, is again part of that. Now, as far as the episode itself, one of the things I noticed about the episode, The Sign, was it was designed to be kind of a closer, but also to answer a lot of questions that fans had throughout the series. Two big things that I noticed right off the bat was, where was Grandpa Healer this whole time? So Grandpa Healer shows up.
Yeah, I thought he was just dead.
Right. So there was this internet fan theory that Grandpa Healer was dead or was a ghost, because he shows up in one early first season episode, but he only shows up in like a Zoom call. And when he shows up, the kids don't really acknowledge him. So you could pass that away as a ghost. And then he never shows up again pretty much the whole series. So we see the Grandma Healer a lot. So this is Bandit's mom. But she never really refers to Grandpa, and Grandpa's never around the house, and everyone's kind of wondering what's going on. We are told that Chili's mom is dead. We're told that explicitly. And we meet Chili's dad. So, what happens to Grandpa? Well, he shows up at the wedding in person, not a ghost, and was like, oh, I was in India the last few years finding myself. And that's it. It's like a throwaway line, but explains this huge rabbit hole internet theory. And then, of course, we see Chili's sister, Brandy, who suffered infertility in onesies, and she's pregnant, and so everyone's really excited because she's going to have a baby. Of course, we're not really told who the dad is or how that all happened, but maybe that will be a season 5 episode, something like that. To be very honest, even though I loved, it had all the great Bluey elements like Bingo and Bluey doing things and learning lessons, I didn't actually like how they finally ended the episode.
The ending ruined the whole episode.
Right. It felt very anticlimactic, partly because they had already loaded like all their stuff, so their house was empty, and now they have to re-put back all their stuff. But honestly, like, especially for kids who are moving, they're going to watch this episode and be like, well, if I just wish really hard and work things out, I'm not going to move. And it's like right now we're dealing with our kids changing schools. We're not moving, they're just changing schools, and they're really having a hard time with it. They really like the school that they're at, but for several reasons we need to move them to a different school, and my oldest especially is really struggling with this. And it would be horrible just at the last minute to say, you know what, since you don't want to move, we're just going to keep you in that other school. We're going to forget everything we did before.
Especially since we know the new school is going to be better for him than his current school.
Exactly. And it was very anticlimactic. It was kind of frustrating, And again, one of the things I loved about Bluey is it didn't shy away from hard things, whether it was the death of a bird they found or infertility or not getting a toy they wanted, like Past the Parcel episode where they learned to deal with failure and disappointment. But here, everything just ends in this perfect bow, and everything's perfect and nice. And obviously I wanted Radley and Frisky to work out. I didn't want them to actually not get married.
That wasn't disappointing, them getting back together and getting married.
But I feel like they could have done it a little bit differently, and I don't know. It was a little bit of a letdown, in my opinion.
No, this was a missed opportunity.
Right.
It's a missed opportunity to teach kids that even if something's hard and scary, it can be the right thing to do. It can be good. It can work out. And like you said, now it just says, oh, well, if I wish hard enough, then I'm not going to do this scary thing that I don't want to do. when maybe it really is best for the family. How many times as parents do we have to make those really hard decisions that are scary, but we just gotta let go and let God, and things work out. But we have to go through the hard part before we get to the good part, and it works out.
Yep. So we're not sure if this is the end. If this is the end of Bluey, I'm okay with that, even though I would love more Bluey episodes. You know, sometimes it's better to end on a high note than to just let it dribble on into mediocrity, which unfortunately happens to a lot of shows like, I don't know, Lost, Once Upon a Time, myriad of other shows.
Well, those have specific reasons why they...
hey,
we only mapped out these first 2 seasons. Now we got to come up with 2 more seasons.
Right.
Hey, let's throw all this stuff in there.
But I will say this. I don't know what the future holds, but I would say at this moment, this is the best children's program of the 2020s so far. Okay? There are other contenders, and again, we're only halfway through this decade, but so far I have not thought of a better one that has great art, just great storytelling, great animation, so many unique episodes, like the one with the rain where they don't talk, or the Shadowlands episode where they play this extended game, or Sleepy Time, which is one of the greatest pieces of short animation ever created in human history, and largely without capitulation. You know, there's a lot of kids shows that give in to the cultural expectations or try to dance different philosophies against each other, and Bluey was just Bluey. It didn't speak down to kids, it didn't try to be culturally relevant, but it also didn't try to force any particular agenda. It was just really, really great. Now, I do have to mention one small little postscript, okay? This is, unfortunately, the world we live in online and with everything. So, one of the things when anytime you come to one of these shows, especially in the last few years, is the show going to start including a lot of far left elements, especially when it comes to racism or to the LGBT movement or to, you know, just something that really marks it as part of a current cultural trend as opposed to kind of a universal idea. And we had a moment like that kind of in The Sign. I'll be honest, I did not notice this at all the first time we watched the episode, but there was a brief moment where, according to some internet sleuths, one of the children at the school that Bluey goes to mentions that he has, quote, 2 moms.
No, now, he doesn't. He doesn't say that. That's
he says,
not what he
says when they say, what do you think about this? He's like, oh, well, me mums does this. Okay.
When me mums told me that my dog went away or whatever.
Okay, now, people have gone way down this rabbit hole more than it needs to. On the one hand, this could be purely a slang thing, you know, in the same way we refer to pops as a singular person. Mums could be possessive, it could be plural, but meant to be singular. It's a small child talking in an Australian accent, and I noticed, at least initially, when you turn on the subtitles, it refers to mum apostrophe S, like a possessive, as opposed to a plural, okay? But because one interpretation could be referring to 2 moms, lots of internet people, especially, I forget her exact YouTube handle, but she's an Australian film critic who's a huge Bluey fan. But there was one in particular I remember that just took this to the extreme, and she said Bluey now has LGBT inclusion, and she did like a 20-minute video about it, and it was a big deal. I think it's a lot of hullabaloo over nothing, to use another fun British term. I don't think it really represents much. It's very easily explained away, and Joe Brum and Bluey have not said anything about this at all, which is the wise decision. The moment you make some sort of statement, it's going to make it worse. And the other thing I noticed is, like, within a week or two, like, all the big podcasters talked about it, both conservative and liberal, and then it just kind of went away. And now no one talks about it. So that tells me that it's not really a big thing, and I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Yeah, when I heard the line, I didn't interpret it as 2 moms. I interpreted it as my mom has.
Right. And again, if no one said anything, I wouldn't have noticed. But at the same time, it unfortunately is a sign of a lot that happens because you never really know. You know, you have the Acolyte in Star Wars, Peppa Pig itself, which Joe Brum used to work on, started including, you know, some LGBT characters. You had even a Paw Patrol spin-off, have a non-binary character. And this is just something parents have to kind of be aware of. And it's really frustrating. I don't want to sit there and think constantly like, what's this? What's that? Is that some secret meaning? That's not the kind of person I am. But at the same time, you just kind of have to be aware. What are my values? What values do I want to instill in my kids? And honestly, this has always happened. I mean, back in the 90s, back in the 80s, my parents didn't let me watch X-Men because they thought it was too violent.
But they let you watch Power Rangers?
Yes. I think it was because Wolverine had like those retractable claws. They thought that was really scary.
But I don't know. Power Rangers is...
I don't know. Maybe because Power Rangers is like otherworldly. I don't know.
I don't know.
They let me watch Power Rangers. They didn't let you watch X-Men. Go figure. Anyway. So yeah, thanks for watching this kind of dual...
Wait. Episode. And you can watch Sabrina, and they don't want to talk to the kids about Harry Potter? What?
Don't ask. I don't know. Okay, my household was... It's odd that I became a film major because my household had very eclectic taste. My mom didn't watch almost anything. She was very, nothing's good unless it's explicitly religious. My dad was really into science fiction and fantasy, and he would watch things like Godzilla and Monty Python. So I didn't get, great cinema until I was in high school and went to college. I don't know. Maybe we'll have a day where we talk about our backgrounds, but it's kind of a funny story. Anyway, thanks for listening.
I just like consistency.
Yes.
I want things to make sense.
Oh my gosh, this podcast has more endings than Lord of the Rings. Anyway, thanks for listening. It's great to have Violet here. I think having a dual format will be better than what we were having. Next week, we are going to talk about the Garfield movie. We are going to go see it with our whole family. We do one family film a year because it costs $100. It's for everybody.
We've done a few this year.
Well, we did the Mario Brothers. That was the big one.
That was last year, but this year we did the Paw Patrol. Remember? We had to go see Paw Patrol.
Oh, that's right, the Mighty Pups movie. I forgot about that. Yeah. That wasn't great. Anyway,
but it's
it was okay. Sky's a weak character. Hot take on Paw Patrol. But anyway.
Marshall for the win.
No. I gotta show you this video where this guy goes through...
I saw the video. He's
Marshall.
Wrong. He's wrong. Don't be hating on Marshall.
Well, at least it's not Zuma. Anyway. Okay. Have a good week. God bless. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.